السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. We welcome all of you here for another family night event. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to brothers and sisters who've made it out here to attend with us this event. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it heavy on your scale on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen. We'd also like to thank and appreciate Sheikh Ibrahim Zidan for making the time from his busy schedule to be with us here for our event. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward him abundantly for taking this time to be with us here and benefit us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless him and reward him. Allahumma ameen. Inshallah, without any further delay, we'll begin our program. And as always, there's nothing better to begin with except the recitation of the Quran. And inshallah, for today's program, opening the program, we have with us our dear brother Muhammad Samir, who will be giving us a few verses from the Quran before we start, inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. حاميم. تنزيل الكتاب من الله العزيز العليم. غافر الذنب وقابل التوب شديد العقاب ذي الطول. لا إله إلا هو إليه المصير. ما يجادل في آيات الله إلا الذين كفروا فلا يغررك تقلبهم في البلاد. كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح والأحزاب من بعدهم وهمت كل أمة برسولهم ليأخذوه وجادلوا بالباطل ليدحضوا به الحق فأخذتهم فكيف كان عقاب. وكذلك حقت كلمة ربك على الذين كفروا أنهم أصحاب النار. الذين يحملون العرش ومن حوله يسبحون بحمد ربهم ويؤمنون به ويستغفرون للذين آمنوا ربنا وسعت كل شيء رحمة وعلما فاغفر للذين تابوا واتبعوا سبيلك وقهم عذاب الجحيم. ربنا وأدخلهم جنات عدن التي وعدتهم ومن صلح من آبائهم وأزواجهم وذرياتهم إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. وقهم السيئات ومن تق السيئات يومئذ فقد رحمته وذلك هو الفوز العظيم. إن الذين كفروا ينادون لمقت الله أكبر من مقتكم أنفسكم إذ تدعون إلى الإيمان فتكفرون. قالوا ربنا أمتنا اثنتين وأحييتنا اثنتين فاعترفنا بذنوبنا فهل إلى خروج من سبيل ذلكم بأنه إذا دعي الله وحده كفرتم وإن يشرك به تؤمنوا فالحكم لله العلي الكبير هو الذي يريكم آياته وينزل لكم من السماء رزقا وما يتذكر إلا من ينيب فادعوا الله مخلصين له الدين ولو كره الكافرون.
Jazakallah khairan wa fathallahu alayk. Muhammad Samir is one of our graduates from Al-Minhaal Academy years ago, and he's now, alhamdulillah, helping us with the Tahfidh program. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen him and to reward him and to keep us all in him guided. Allahumma ameen. Without further ado, inshallah, we would like to begin our program with Sheikh Ibrahim.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. The subject of the family, and I would like to add to it the family according to the ways of the early generations of Islam. Our understanding of this deen and the ayat that were recited, mashallah, yani ikhtiyarun muwaffaq, good choice, that this wahy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, which is wahyan, Al-Quran wa Sunnah. Both are revelations from Allah. And what ought to be done with regards to the wahy, to the revelation from Allah, is two things. For us to learn, to have the ilm, to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, because this wahy is the thing between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said about the Quran. That Al-Quran طرفه بيد الله وطرفه بأيديكم. The Quran has two ends, one with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and one with you. So to get to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and that's the ilm part, and then the other thing is to submit ourselves, to act upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. So the Quran addresses everyone, all mankind, for the people to come into the fold of Islam, inviting them, يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. The first nida, the first call in the Quran to all mankind, according to the tertib of the Mus'haf we know. So calling the people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their Lord. And then once they get into the fold of Islam, which is also before for people to understand that He's the Lord of the Alameen, so the people, they need to willingly submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the difference between us as human beings and the rest of the creation of Allah, that we have a window of choice. And this is where the entire objective of this life is to willingly be in the state of the ubudiyyah to Allah. Because whether a person like it or not, we're all in state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَهُ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ طَوْعًا وَكَرْهًا. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Him everything submitted itself in the heavens and the earth. طَوْعًا أَوْ كَرْهًا. Willingly or unwillingly. We're born that way, we depart from this life this way, the aqdar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the part that we need to choose, we need to fit everything together in the same way. So we to willingly submit ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once this is clear, any subject that we talk about in matters of the deen, when we have this foundation, the matter is easy. we're not going to be in a state of convincing with reason necessarily why we need to be upon this, why the husband should do this, why the wife should do that, for worldly benefit or this or that, even though everything is with the perfect wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The believer is basically waiting to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, and they would submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is extremely important when it comes to all matters of our life, and also when it comes to the Muslim family, because it's a relationship that involves two, initially the husband and the wife, and then if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, for them to have children, and then relatives and so on. And that relationship is different than any other relationship, and that's why the Quran revealed the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's not based on the desires of the people, it's based on revelation from Allah. So things has to be observed according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. And that's why we have to always refer to the wahy, to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a verse in the Quran, or more than one, but the verse that governs the relationship between husband and wife, and then if there is children, is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ فَإِنْ كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And then the verses also continues. But the point here is it's usually mentioned with regards to the men, and then other texts, it includes the men and women. But here for the men, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed them because they have the qawama, they are the ones in charge of their household. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated that in the Quran, He said, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. That means live with them, meaning with your spouses, with your wives, with al-ma'ruf. The knowledge of understanding this has to be according to how the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba radiallahu anhu understood it, the way the early generations of Islam understood this. Not that someone comes after 1400 years to twist the words to make it seem like linguistically you can do whatever you want. As Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, Al-Quran hammalu awjuh. Quran can give many meanings. So how would you know the proper meaning or the right meaning? That with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, فَإِذَا جَادَلُوكُمْ فِي الْقُرْآنِ فَجَادِلُوهُمْ بِالسُّنَّةِ. If they argue with you with the Quran, you return that back with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, his speech, his actions, what he approved of ﷺ. And also the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the hadith of Al-Ibad ibn Sariya, the famous hadith that in it the Prophet ﷺ, he said, فَإِنَّهُ مَا يَعِشْ مِنْكُمْ فَسَيَرَى اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Whoever lives among you, he will see many differences, whether it's in Aqidah, whether it's in the way of understanding, whether also in these types of relationships, it's everything. So what to do when this happens? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِسُنَّتِي وَسُنَّةِ الْخُلَفَاءِ الرَّاشِدِينَ الْمَهْدِينَ مِنْ بَعْدِ عَضُّوا عَلَيْهَا بِالنَّوَاجِذِ وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحْدَثَاتِ الْأُمُورِ الْحَدِيثِ. Which means be upon my sunnah, and the sunnah, the way of the rightly guided Khalifa after me, Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiallahu anhum, عَضُّوا عَلَيْهَا بِالنَّوَاجِذِ. Bite on it with your murad, and be warned of the newly introduced matters and matters of the religion, the hadith. So it's a long introduction, even though it's not long enough. Because once this is established in our hearts, then what is left is very easy and simple. And there's so many different things to be mentioned when we talk about the Muslim family and our duty and what we need to be upon. But I would quote some of the things that Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he mentioned in the ayah, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ فَإِنْ كَرِهْتُمُهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. If we understand this part of the verse, it takes care of many of the issues and the problems that we have or we might have. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our families and our households from any harm. He says, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ. First of all, عَاشِرُهُنَّ al-mu'ashara. Usually this word is used between the husband and the wife. This is how the families are. And that command or that verb requires that it's not done alone. You cannot make mu'ashara, living with your own self, meaning in that context. That's why some verbs, it requires someone else for you to attain that verb. So there is no mu'ashara that can be perceived when a person is alone. When a person is living alone, he's not making mu'ashara. Mu'ashara, what does that mean? Living with someone. So that means it requires both parties to live up to this. But it's here addressing the men first. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Al-mu'ashara is the good living with someone, and especially again this relationship between the husband and the wife. Bil-ma'ruf, al-ma'ruf, literally what is known to be good. And this is one of two meanings, as the ulama they say in the tafsir of the ayah. This is again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding the men, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. Live with them a goodly living with the ma'ruf. Al-ma'ruf either means what's known to be good, as long of course that it is not contradicting to any of matters of deen in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. What is the norm of the people to be good, then live with them with this goodness. The other meaning of al-ma'ruf here is al-ihsan, is the goodness from oneself. You live with them with goodness, and that's why there is responsibilities upon the husband when it comes to the way that he deals with his wife versus what the wife should do also with her husband. And there are common things. We're not going to talk about the rights necessarily, but the husband, and this is not for any of the two sides if the sisters are listening, not that at the end of the lecture a sister would say to her husband, see, did you hear what he said? And then the husband would say, did you hear what he said? It's not about this at all, actually. It's about submitting ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But yes, truly the men, they have a heavy responsibility, and they all have responsibility. But the responsibility of the men, of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them, is that they are the side that should overlook a little bit more. Overlook, that means let things go. And to deal with things with hikmah, with wisdom. Of course, both parties are supposed to do this, but with al-ihsan, with goodness. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he said in the tafsir of the ayah, أي طيبوا أقوالكم لهن. طيبوا أقوالكم. Your speech, you make it pure and nice when you speak to them. وحسنوا أفعالكم. And perfect your actions to the best of your ability. وهيئاتكم, and your appearance, بحسب قدرتكم, to the best of your ability. كما تحب ذلك منها. Addressing the men, the same way that you would love for her to do to you. You want her to speak nice to you, you want her to do actions that are good to you, and you want her to appear nice to you. The same thing, do the same thing for her. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And for them is what is also upon you in ma'ruf, in matters of ma'ruf. Meaning it's a go back and forth rights. That means they both should observe the benefit of the other. One principle, qa'idah, when it comes to relationships in the deen of Islam, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed ayat of the Quran or hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, is not based on al-mukafa'ah. It's not based on rewarding one another. That means I will be nice to you because you're nice to me. This is what every human being with the minimum amount of decency would act. If you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. This is obvious. The wahy, the revelation from Allah, does not address this obvious and that's it. This is obvious. Anybody would say the same thing. If you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you. No, husn al-khuluq, or goodness, it's a step further. Meaning, what if the other side is not doing what they're supposed to do? What if one is not choosing the best words, not acting in the proper way, things like this? Since this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that means you will be asked about it regardless. So that means the relationships, whether it's between the husband and the wife or brothers in the masjid or anything, it's about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us in whatever situation that we're in. So it's not based on al-mu'awadat or al-mukafa'at, back and forth, rewarding one another. It's based on that a person would يخاف الله في زوجته, يخاف الله في إخوانه, يرجو الله تبارك وتعالى في زوجته, والزوجة ترجو الله عز وجل في زوجها. What does that mean? The person fears Allah when it comes to his relationship with his wife. He hopes for the rewards from Allah in his relationship with his wife. And the same thing with the wife. So So it is difficult for a human being to deal with someone that is not being in the best conduct. But this is where mujahadatun nafs. There's a struggle that has done with ilm. We're not talking about being extreme in this manner or to cancel completely our human feelings. But we have to go by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us and be patient. To the extent of which even Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, when he said maybe that if a man has a wife that are rough, meaning something with bad manners, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him from her righteous offsprings. That means not every issue or any problem that a person would just terminate the relationship. No, وَعَاشِرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. This is also what it means. And then he says, وَقَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, and the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ. The hadith that we heard many times. The best among you are those who are best to their families, and I'm the best to my family. So then we learn the way of the Prophet ﷺ in his household with his wives and so on. He says, وَكَانَ مِنْ أَخْلَاقِهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم, from the akhlaq, from the manners of the Prophet ﷺ, أنه, as he says, جَمِيلُ الْعِشْرَةِ. Al-ishra again is the living together that has the meaning of goodness in it already. It says Jamil al-ishra, beautiful in his relationship. Da'im al-bishr, he's always showing the pleasant face. Al-bishr from al-bashara, from the skin of the face, he's always showing that he's pleasant. Yuda'ibu ahla, plays with his family. Yatalattafu bihim, he is kind to them. Yusi'uhum nafaqatah, to the best of his ability. Make it ease when it comes to the nafaqa or spending. Yudahiku nisa'a, he laughs with his wives. حتى إنه كان يسابق عائشة أم المؤمنين, as we also heard this many times, that he would make a race with Aisha رضي الله عنها running. يتودد إليها بذلك, he's doing that عليه الصلاة والسلام to make this mawadda, showing the love to her. Not necessarily that he wants to run عليه الصلاة والسلام, but it's bringing himself into a level where he can bring this happiness in the other side. You know, not necessarily that the person, where is my part of this? It's not about what you would get from it, it's about the other side. Doing things for the sake of Allah, trying to please the other side, all for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As he says here, يَتَوَدَّدُ إِلَيْهَا بِذَلِكَ, that he's making, and mawadda is showing the love by doing such a thing. And as he mentioned this narration, when she said سابقني رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فسابقته, the Messenger صلى الله عليه وسلم, he سابقني, that means he said let's go race, and of course not in the presence of men, and he told the people to go forward, no one would see them whatsoever. So she said فسابقته, she beat him رضي الله عنها in running, and Allah knows best, you know, was that intentional or not. Allah, it's just that she beat him in the running. وذلك قبل أن أحمل اللحم, this is before I carried the meaning weight. ثم سابقته بعدما حملت اللحم فسبقني. Then I asked him for again to do this race after I gained some weight, so he beat me the next time. So he said, then هذه بتلك, this one is by the first one, now we're even. Right? This is, and he's the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some brothers, they only take this, let's go race. And that's the only time that, because this is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not about racing with your wife, but it's about this mawadda that needs to be observed as part of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَجْتَمِعُ نِسَاءُ كُلَّ لَيْلَ فِي بَيْتِ الَّتِي يَبِيتُ عَنْدَهَا يَأْكُلُ مَعَهُنَّ, till the end of what he said. And we have in the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرَ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. We have in the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam the best example. For those who seek the hereafter, those who seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pleasure of Allah and the hereafter. If it's about this dunya, this is the mukafa'at, this is the rewarding one another. We're not talking about this. Whoever wants the dunya and the pleasant feelings only in the dunya, this is not the subject. The subject is that the happiness and the goodness is a continuous one. Nothing would challenge whatsoever the end of things. وَأَنَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى, to your Lord is the end of things. We all will die and we all return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the end, if you get married and you have children and you have wealth and you had the happiest life on the face of earth and wealth and so on, and then what? We'll leave all of this and everybody will return to Allah. So what matters is after this life. And that's why, before we continue, one of the ulama, Abu Walid al-Badi, has a very famous wasiyah to his son, al-wasiyah al-waladiyah. It's famous to be al-wasiyah al-waladiyah, giving wasiyah to his son, one of which that he said to him, and I won't quote the whole thing, but when he gave him the wasiyah to be upon al-Iman, and this is another subject with regards to the children, to raise them upon the Iman, to believe in Allah and the pillars of al-Iman, and to warn them against what is evil, to warn them against shirk, as Luqman, he warned his son. The first thing, which is always amazing to think, this is the first thing that he commanded his son. Al-maw'idha is the admonition, is the reminder of the end of things, something to soften his heart. Do not associate partners with Allah. Part of the upbringing, part of making the families and the household upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us, is to bring this reality in the hearts, to soften the hearts with believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, warning against the worst thing ever, the concept of things. What is the worst thing to your children, or how you bring them up to consider what is the worst thing on the face of earth? If it's not ash-shirku billah, if it's not associating partners with Allah, that means we need to learn our deen. The worst thing ever. Doesn't mean that this is the only worst or the only bad thing, but the worst thing ever is what makes people in the hereafter being in the hellfire forever. And then warning against anything that can lead to this, and the sins and the haram and so on, but to teach them. So after he gave them these advices, and mashallah, very detailed, but one of the things that he mentioned to show the objective of this is what? It's not about this worldly life and that's it. He said something. He says, وَيَعْلَمُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى شَوْقِي إِلَى ذَلِكَ. That means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how am I eager for you to be the best. And he mentioned also that the only individual that wants someone else to be better than him is the father to the son. You won't find that in any other relationship. And then he says, وَحِرْصِ عَلَيْهِ كَمَا يَعْلَمُ إِشْفَاقِي. This is the point that I want to mention here. مِنْ أَن تَزِلَّ بِأَحَدِكُمَا. It was the wasiyah to two of his sons, that he is so worried. الشفقة إن كنا قبل في أهلنا مشفقين. The believers will say that in the day of in Jannah. We used to be mushfiqeen when we are with our families. في أهلنا. When they are with their household, with their families, they used to have shafaqa. Mushfiqeen, what is mushfiqeen? It's fear mixed with grief of what might happen of harm that would afflict them. And every parent would have this in their hearts, right? They get worried of what's going to happen to their children. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in us. So this fear with the grief of might something happen that is bad to them should be focused on the hereafter. And that's what he means here. He says, إشفاقي من أن تزل أحدكما قدم أو تعدل به فتنة عليه من سخط الله تعالى. He says, I'm worried that any of you would slip, meaning in sins, وَالْعِيَذُ بِاللَّهِ in kufr, in things of that nature that would bring the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon him. And the concern is that they won't meet in the hereafter. Because the relationships in this life, it only continues if they're upon al-Iman, if they're upon the faith, and they die as Muslims, and they die upon the Tawheed, as Yaqub, he gave the advice to his sons. لَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Do not die except as Muslims. So when they die as Muslims, and if they enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will meet. And it's by the mercy of Allah that the higher one in Jannah will take with him the one of a lower level. والذين آمنوا واتبعتهم ذريتهم بإيمان ألحقنا بهم ذريتهم وما ألتناهم من عملهم من شيء. Those who believed, والذين اتبعتهم ذريتهم, those who their offsprings followed them with what? With al-Iman. This is the objective. That we want to be upon al-Iman ourselves, and the iman increases and decreases. This is the iman according to the people of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, increases with the good deeds and decreases with the bad deeds. So we want to perfect our iman, and we want our offsprings to follow us in al-iman. And this is how they will be together in the Day of Judgment. And you add to this more in the environment that we're in. We're talking about iman al-kufri and kufr even. You know, when someone brought his family to a land where it's easy for them not to slip into sins, wal-'iyadhu billah, but to kufr, wal-'iyadhu billah, we are responsible. So that means we have to make sure we do the best we can. We take the means, we make dua with all the means that needs to be observed. But because of the time, we need to do this and to have in our hearts, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees what's in our hearts. The concern, but فَاقِدُ الشَّيْءِ لَا يُعْطِيهِ, the one that doesn't have it, he cannot give. If you don't have al-iman, how can you give al-iman to someone? Right? You cannot give sadaqah unless you have something to give sadaqah. So the parents, they need to be upon the same mission, both husbands and wife, not fighting with each other over their personal things here and forgetting the objectives of things. But rather the goal is to continue to be together after this life with matters of al-iman. They would follow one another. So he feared for his offspring that, you know, we want to continue that relationship, not just in this life. And also to give comfort to those, you know, some of the brothers, for example, they're reverts, or their families are not Muslims, or they died in the state of disbelief. Once a person dies, these relationships are severed forever. The one that created in us fear and hope and grief and sadness and all of that, He subhanahu wa ta'ala would remove this completely if a person is a believer versus someone else, there's a disbeliever. Nuh alayhi salam, his son was a disbeliever. So after this life is over, right, things in the hereafter, no one in Jannah will sit and grieve because his closest relative is in the hellfire. There's no such a thing, it does not exist. So it's the concern in this life only, and if someone is tested by this, to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is part of expiation of the sins. But then the ayah that we just mentioned, فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, that maybe that you would hate them, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring in that a great goodness, or khayran kathira. That means also addressing the husband. Maybe, and this is can also apply on the other side. Maybe that you would dislike them, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring in them a great goodness. So he says, Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, فَعَسَىٰ أَن يَكُونَ صَبْرُكُمْ مَعَ إِمْسَاكِكُمْ لَهُنْ. Maybe that with your sabr, with your patience, while you're still having them as a spouse, and even though you dislike this, but you still apply what mentioned earlier with the goodness and so on, there will be a great goodness in this life and in the hereafter. As Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he says, وَأَنْ يَعْطِفَ عَلَيْهَا فَيُرْزَقْ مِنْهَا وَلَدًا وَيَكُونُ فِي ذَلِكَ الْوَلَدْ خَيْرٌ كَثِيرٌ. Abdullah ibn Abbas and also Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said something the like of it, that maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him offspring from her that will bring all kinds of goodness, or any goodness, because it's left open like this. And we have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, beautiful hadith, لا يفرق مؤمن مؤمنة إن كره منها خلقا رضي من الآخر. يفرق mean يبغض. No believing man would hate his wife that is a believer. If he hates a manner in her, he would be pleased with something else. Nobody has all evil, nobody has all goodness, nobody's perfect. So instead of focusing on what is negative and on what is bad, look at what is good. As long as she is righteous, and this is min mata'i hadhihi dunya, from the joy of this life, for a person to be given a righteous wife, and the same thing for the wife to have a righteous husband. One characteristic that is not good, one this or that, to overlook, as long as the deen and the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not severed whatsoever, are not compromised. And therefore, when we look into the text that governs this, whether it's for the men, استوصوا بالنساء خيرا, also as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, take well care of the women. And this is one of the last words of the Prophet ﷺ. And Sayyidul Nas al-Mutaghafil, as the ulama, they always mention that al-Mutaghafil, the one that overlooks the mistakes. He's not dwelling over every single shortcoming. He overlooks, as long as there's nothing against the deen of Allah. And the small matters, cooked, didn't cook, clean or not clean, even though these things are important, but not to make fights. focus on the objectives of things and work on fixing the other things, but without breaking the marriage or causing things. And that's why also observing these things in front of the children, that the child should always respect his mother and his father. So that's why one of the tactics to be done, and it should be coming from one's heart, that the wife, for example, the mother, she would never show any disrespect to her husband in front of the children. If she disrespects you between you in a private manner, it's okay. It doesn't mean that how dare you speak to me like this. It's not a call for someone to disrespect the other, definitely not. But the issue of pardoning one another, one of the rights that the ulama mentioned, the rights of a wife on her husband and vice versa, is that when they make a mistake, it's to pardon them, especially if they seek forgiveness, not to be non-forgiving and things of that nature. But the issue of respect, because you want your children to listen to their father, and you, even as they used to in the past, and they used to even warn the children when it comes to the father, when your father come, I will tell him, but of course you don't lie, you have to be truthful. They have to respect the father. And the same thing, the father should not show any disrespect to his wife in front of the children. So for example, when she says in front of the children, don't be harsh on him, he's still young, this in front of the child, this is dangerous. That means you're undermining what the father is when it comes to his authority and things of that nature. I know the time is running, but when we look at the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and his actions as a husband and as a father, how he treated his daughters ﷺ, and also the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and the same thing for the women. When you have this perfect combination, the husband is lenient, he's soft, he has the best manners, but at the same time when it comes to matters of deen, there's no compromisation of the deen whatsoever. And on the other side, the woman, she is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also explained in the Quran, 3 qualities briefly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about the Muslim woman, the wife. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ. فَالصَّالِحَات, she is salihah. She is a righteous woman, as-salah fi ad-din. She fears Allah. She submits herself to the commands of Allah. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded to make salah, she makes salah. The commands of Allah to wear hijab, she wears hijab. Not the hijab that is necessarily everybody's wearing, but the hijab that Allah is pleased with. The hijab of the sahabiyat, the hijab of the early generations of Islam. This is the conditions of it to be observed. فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَات. What does qanitat means? أي مطيعات. Muti'at, they are obedient to their husbands. This word, I have no idea why it causes issues. Seriously, when you think about it, it's nothing but shaitan. Or bad manners maybe from the husbands. But this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is commanding the Muslim women. This issue of at-ta'ah, or to be obedient, we all experience this in one form or the other. What's wrong with it? You would find sometimes the masses, they want to be disobedient to the rulers. Why? When you're supposed to obey them in ma'ruf, in matters of ma'ruf. You go to work and you have your boss telling you to do something. You have to obey, otherwise you're going to be fired. Right? The subject of obedience, there is always authorities in our life. Right? Whether it's in a place or institutions, we follow the rules. If they put the rules with the traffic lights and everything, say, I'm not going to be obedient to this, it doesn't make sense to me. No, you obey, but is it only when we get fined? Is that when we kind of obey and things like this? We shouldn't. And that's why, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنكُمْ. Obey Allah and obey the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the absolute obedience, complete blind obedience. Once we know, we obey, we submit. Other than that, in ma'ruf, not in sins, of course. And that's why when this is mentioned, the wife, yes, she's obedient to her husband in matters of ma'ruf. So the perfect combination is he has the best manners to his wife, and she is salihah, she's righteous, she's obedient to her husband. And فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ. حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ. Hafizat, they're guarding bil-ghayb. Al-ghayb is with the unseen. That has 2 meanings to it, and they're both correct. Of course, the first one, when it comes to the commands of Allah. If she's alone at home, the husband is outside, and she's alone, and it's the time for the salah. Does she need the husband to remind her of the salah? She would observe her salah, even if she's alone. Men, sometimes they get more help. I'm talking about the righteous ones. You're with your brothers and at work or whatever, it's time for the salah, you might hear the adhan. If you're in a Muslim country, you find all kinds of things that helps you to make the salah and the salatul jama'ah and so on. But for the woman, if she's alone, it's exactly like the shepherd when he's in the desert, where the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah is pleased with someone in that state. Time of the salah comes, no one is around him, he makes adhan and he makes salah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes such an individual. Oh, salatul isha. So the obedience and the mu'ashara bil ma'ruf and hafidatul ghaib, this is with the ghaib, meaning with the unseen when it comes to a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with regards to her husband when he's not present. She guards him in his household with regards to his offsprings, with the children and so on. I took too much of the time, but we didn't start yet, but it's okay, inshallah. I'm sorry? No, go ahead, inshallah. It's okay, I don't want to keep you long, inshallah.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Inshallah, we will carry on, and then until 7 o'clock we'll stop and then call the Iqamah and pray Isha and have dinner afterwards, inshallah. Jazakumullah.
Inshallah, forgive me, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it benefiting. Continuing with the characteristics of both husbands and wife are mentioned clearly in the Quran. And anything that is mentioned in the book of Allah as a command, or in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, be assured that it's not going to come at ease, because we have enemies. You know, the enemies within our own selves, our own nafs, our own self, our desires, the shaitan. And we know the hadith in Sahih Muslim where the shaitan, he puts his thrown on the water somewhere, Allah knows best where, and he sends saraya, he sends his deputies all over the world. They come back at the end of the day, and one would say, I kept with him till he did this. He said he didn't do anything. He didn't, all the evil stuff that happens on the face of earth. Till someone, and he comes from his jinn shayateen, and he says, I kept with him till I separated him from his wife. So he would say, Ant, you are the one, and he bring him closer. This hadith, for people, they think, how can that be, even though divorce is not even haram to start with? How can that be the one that shaitan would say to the one of his deputies, you are the one, when other things that are so evil, he says you didn't do anything? Because these are if there's this family, this household that comes as a result of that offsprings, they are the real breed of shaitan, they are the real deputies of shaitan, coming from broken homes. So this is a serious matter. Shaitan, if all of the work of shaitan at the end a person repents to Allah, all of that is destroyed. But he wants people that it becomes difficult for them to see the truth, difficult for them to repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we know the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, كُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. It's a mas'uliyah. We will be asked. We will be asked in the day of judgment about our families. فَالرَّجُلُ رَاعٍ فِي بَيْتِهِ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. The man is ra'in, is like a shepherd, and he will be asked about his ra'iyah, his dependencies. That means mas'ul, the word mas'ul in Arabic sometimes it gives the meaning of someone in charge. No, it's about being questioned in the day of judgment. So when a person will be questioned about his iman, his salah, his ibadah, his sins, he will be asked about his wife, his children. We will be asked about this. And the wife, as the hadith says, she also ra'aya fi bayti zawjiha. She will be asked about the household of her husband. She will be asked about this. So we have to prepare ourselves, and how can we fulfill what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us according to the wahy revelation from Allah. So the verses that talks about the men versus the verses that talks about women, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ الْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ, and what all that means. And then we have the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam are so many. When a woman comes to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, as Umar ibn Husayn radiallahu anhu, when his aunt, she came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and she was saying something to him, and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said to her, how are you to your husband? She said, لا ألوه جهدا, I do not do any shortcomings, I do the best I can to him, and so on. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, see how you are to your husband, إنما هو جنتك ونارك. He is your Jannah or the hellfire. So that means how you can have an idea how your hereafter will be according to how you are with your husband. And the same thing, the husband will be asked about his wife, the rights to be observed, teaching her the children to be upon the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and things of that nature. And that's why, as he says to her, فَانْظُرِي أَيْنَ أَنْتِ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّمَا هُوَ جَنَّتُكِ وَنَارِكِ. Look of how you are to him. So when a Muslim woman, she's righteous, and she is being obedient to her husband in matters of ma'ruf and goodness, imagine that if she's doing this because she fears Allah, she's obedient to Allah. And then on the other side, the husband, he's not righteous. This is one of the worst state that a woman can be in, because she doesn't know what to do. She wants to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then her husband is not allowing that to happen because he's not being righteous. So that's why when both fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things becomes perfect by the will of Allah, but life itself is not perfect, and that's why they have to overlook and forgive and pardon. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ وَأَوْلَادِكُمْ عَدُوًّا لَكُمْ فَاحْذَرُوهُمْ. Or you who believe, from your spouses and your children are enemies to you, so warn yourself against this. Enemies, yes, because if they take you away from the pleasure of Allah, they become the reason for you to disbelieve or to commit sin. They are enemies to you because of how things will end up to be. And the ayah has a sabab, or a reason why it was revealed, and it was when they were in Mecca and they were migrating from Mecca to Al-Madinah. Some of the people, they were believers, Muslims, but they did not migrate with the Prophet ﷺ because of their wives. They kind of nagged them or whatever there is to stay in Mecca, not to leave. So when they stayed and they did migrate, and then later on they migrated and they were upon al-Iman. But when they migrated later on, they saw the companions radiallahu anhum excelled in al-Iman. They become now more righteous and more knowledgeable, and they saw that they are far in the level and the verses that talks about as-sabiqun, the foremost. So they wanted to go and divorce their wives and to be angry with their wives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayah. Some of them are enemies to you. But then the next words in the verse says, فَمَنْ عَفَى وَأَصْلَحَ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّ مِنْ أَزْوَاجِكُمْ وَأَوْلَادِكُمْ عَدُوًّا لَكُمْ فَاحْذَرُوهُمْ وَإِنْ تَعْفُوا تَصْفَحُوا وَتَغْفِرُوا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. What is then the solution to this? If they are like enemies to you, go beat them up or divorce them? No. It's وَإِنْ تَعْفُوا. If you pardon, تَصْفَحُوا, let go, overlook, and forgive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiver. It's amazing how the two combination is there. And this is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in case, that say for example the wife, she wants the husband to commit a sin. No, the sin is not going to be committed, but he forgives and he pardons and he overlooks. So the outcome is the sin is not going to happen. But at the same time, he still does not lose his good manners with her. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them. So the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and the mutual responsibility. And then, as we said, فَقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِي. If a person doesn't have it, how can he give it to others? We are worried about our children, our families, and so on. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. It's about the actions that we do, but also our righteousness and our goodness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees what's in our hearts. احفظ الله يحفظك. Guard the commands of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guard you, will protect you. One of the meanings of it, in your offsprings, in your children, in your family. As Sa'id al-Musayyab rahimahullah from the Tabi'een, he said that I will be in salah, فَأَزِيدُ فِي صَلَاتِي أَتَذَكَّرُ وَلَدِي فَأَزِيدُ فِي صَلَاتِي. I'll be in salah, and then I remember my son, so I increase my salah. Increase my salah so that Allah protect him in his offsprings. This is the means that we often talk about, the physical means. I want to do this and do this and do that. No, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your righteousness, you're waking up at night to make dua, praying 2 rak'ah, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide your children for you, and you yourself, you're taking the means of guidance. This is the best and the strongest mean ever. And then what comes afterwards is by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, when he said that there's nothing more aqarr al-ayn al-mu'min, there's nothing more comforting for the eyes of the believer than to see his family and walad and offsprings to be righteous. The most satisfying and the most joyful thing in this life for a believer, when he sees the righteousness in his family. So this is, the concern is there, the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then to raise them upon the ilm, to teach. They have the right upon us to teach them the foundations of this deen, to be upon the tawheed, to warn them even against the shirk, al-bid'ah, the innovations in the deen. As you would find stories in the books, one of the heads of the bid'ah al-marisi, for example, the one that was very deviant, and the kids, the children, when he died, they were throwing stones, the children, they know that this is an evil man. They were raised upon what is the sunnah, what is the bid'ah, to love what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, to hate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates, to raise them like this when they are still under one's protection and things like this. Not to bring sadness to them, but rather to be kind to them and to be taking all of the means, even teaching them the ad'iyah, the du'as, making sure that they make their salah. As we know the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, muru awladakum bis-salati wa hum abna'u 7 wadribuhum 'alayha wa hum abna'u 10. You command them to make the salah when they're 7 years old, and you hit them, you punish them when they're 10 years old if they still don't do it in the right way. And this is to observe the matters of the deen, and even with the things that are happening nowadays with the social media and things like this, to make sure that we are aware of what's happening and not to ruin their fitrah, to corrupt their fitrah. We are responsible for this with the dua of Allah, and to install into the hearts, to the best of our ability, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because no matter what you do, still things, as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, fitan would come come to this ummah, that it would not leave a house unless it enters it. And we see something like this. Every house you find the fitan entering it. So to make sure that we have the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they have the fear of Allah, and with the religious means, with the adhkar, they used to, Sahaba radiallahu anhum used to teach their offsprings, as Abdullah ibn Umar he said, Abdullah ibn Zubayr he said that they would teach them the adhkar, what to say of the dhikr and the dua in the morning and in the evening, and to teach them, of course, tahfidh al-Quran, to make them memorize the Quran as a mean to save them from the harm that they would see in the societies and things of that nature. There's so many different things to be mentioned, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect our families and to make us among those who are steadfast upon the deen of Allah. And inshallah ta'ala the matter is easy because everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We just need to be truthful in our following the deen of Allah and holding fast to the sunnah, to the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And at the end, guidance is in the hands of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whoever He wills, and He leads astray whoever He wills with His justice and His mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum wa sallallahu sallam wa baraka ala Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And forgive me for taking too long. Allahumma musta'an. Any comments or corrections or anything, inshallah? Tafadhal.
Where are we lacking when we consider success as far as academics, but we kind of, I don't want to say procrastinate, but kind of put to the side the Islamic things, or I guess anything deen related for our kids. So, for example, we'll rush to put our kids in the the best public school, and in the way when it comes to and obviously we love the deen. It's not that we don't like the deen, but we'll just put anything deen related to the side for them. We think that they're just knowing or hoping that they know Allah.
As far as the question is what we want from our kids, whether it's success of this life or what exactly, and putting them in different schools and things like this. As mentioned in the beginning, what are we truthfully want from our children? We have to ask ourselves this question. You want them to be successful in this life, mashallah, and the hereafter, right? No problem. We can wish whatever we want, both in this life and in the hereafter. But what is the ultimate one in the hereafter? ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. But what is the thing that governs the other one? Dunya or the hereafter? The hereafter. The concern is the hereafter. If they are successful in this life and they enter the hellfire, that's not success. This is misery. So we want them to enter the Jannah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the path to this is very easy. So what if a person is tested whether to choose something that he thinks it's good for his dunya and his worldly life, but it's in the path of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The answer should not be of any hesitation whatsoever. We choose what is pleasing to Allah. This is to ourselves as adults. So the same thing, we raise our children the way that we want them to be. So if we, as Ibn al-Qayyim and others, they said this child is amana, is a trust, and his heart is like a soft thing, and you would be the reason to inscribe in it whatever you want. Either you will corrupt this heart, put it in an environment that it corrupts it, and you are responsible, or you will put it in an environment where it would nourish it and bring all kinds of goodness. So either you put it in the right environment and you're the one responsible. Imagine someone is killing his child, such an evil thing. This is exactly what people do when they put their children to kill their fitrah, to kill their pure nature. We're not talking about sins anymore. We're talking about kufr. We're talking about the pure nature that once it's corrupted, it's very difficult for anyone to see anything right anymore. So it's not a matter of ease of choice anymore. We have to be truthful with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we want what is best for them in the hereafter, and the dunya will come without undermining the dunya. But the most important thing is the deen of Allah. So many examples in this, and this is the truthfulness that needs to be observed. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy, inshallah. Tafadhal.
You mentioned the hadith where do we find
Now, the takhrij of the hadith, I have the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. I can bring it to you, inshallah. We'll get it, inshallah, before we finish. Anything else, inshallah? Tafadhal.
What guidelines
can we give in regards to our children watching TV or there's a lot of cartoons and a lot of shows and a lot of things that I feel like society presents to the children, to them to see, not just children, people in general. There's a lot of things that we are kind of like controlled with by, what we see, what is, apparent to us through screens, from social media, from TikTok, TV, and it has a great effect on us. So are there some guidelines or, is TV haram altogether, or how do we address this?
Allah musta'an. Wallahi, this fitan of the screens now, that it's not anymore the fitan of the TV alone or something big that you have to carry and it's heavy to enter it in the home. It's in the palms of each and every one of us. So this is such a dangerous fitna, and when it comes to the responsibility of the parents, especially the husband and the wife should be in the same page with their husband. When your children are young, you should have the full responsibility to eliminate these things from them. And there is no need for them to be exposed to these types of things. But the problem is we have it as parents. So they come and sit next to us and they get this attachment. And those who are behind these screens are much stronger and powerful than us. They have many of them, not all of them, but the system of the devil is much stronger. That's why we have to struggle with our own selves to limit things, to make sure that it's correct, and we have to control this for them. We cannot leave them to be corrupted with whatever they want to see. You need to know who's their friends. You need to know also what they are watching. And one of the things with the internet, would you allow your child, for example, to go to a bar? Is it legal for a child to enter into a bar or to commit evil things in it? It's not allowed, but it's allowed in these types of things. And anything in the internet that you enter, that you go to, it's exactly like you physically went to these places, at least when it comes to good deeds or bad deeds. So ghiba is the same, applied whether it's by scrolling something or liking something or something like this. You make backbite of something, right? Or you approve of evil, or you enter a store, for example, shopping. The sisters or even the brothers, when you go shopping, you had already try to take this upon yourself, as if I left my home now and I went to that store and I'm walking in the store. So now it's shopping in the middle of the night, during the morning, at all times. Where is the time that a person can worship Allah? So we have to have control over this, because we will be asked. You have your Wi-Fi at your home, you're the one that is paying for the bills and the phones and things like this. And then once they reach the age of puberty and they're adult, we should have already trained them, and everything at the end is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we have the ability, we should be extremely focused on controlling these environments, not to allow whatsoever anything that is against the deen of Allah, and to use it only in what is good. May Allah protect us. And Islamic schools is one of the ways that people need to support. It's not a luxurious thing anymore. It's something that is an obligation now, that people to be upon this. The hadith is in Sahih al-Jami', but originally it's from where? But it's in Sahih al-Jami', number 1509. Anything else, inshallah? طيب جزاكم الله خيرا وبارك الله فيكم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.